Hey, everybody. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, let me add a happy Mother's Day to what's already been said here today. I hope that all you moms just have a fantastic experience today and are well celebrated. You know, we started talking last week about perhaps the greatest story that's ever been told. It's the greatest story that Jesus ever told, probably the greatest story in the Bible. And I've actually heard some scholars refer to it as the greatest story ever told by anybody anywhere. And it's the story of a father and two sons, and it's found in the Bible in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to get to the 15th chapter. And let's make sure that we're all on the same page with where we left off last week. Last week was all about the younger brother. We talked about the younger brother, and if you missed last week, well, where were you? Okay, stop missing. But what happens is the younger son, he goes to his dad, and he essentially says, Dad, I want my inheritance, and I want it now. And the way Luke phrases it in verse 12 is, Father, give me my share of the estate. And this is a massive, massive slap in the face to his father, huge offense to his dad. He essentially says to his dad, Dad, I don't care if you live or die. I just want what's coming to me, and I want it now, and I want to get out of here. And the father, amazingly, the father grants this request. Like the younger son doesn't want anything to do with him, and the father allows him to make that choice. So he gives the younger son his share of the inheritance, and the son goes off to a distant country, you know, somewhere far from home, somewhere exotic where all the action is. Like if the story were being told today, it might be that he goes off to New York City or Las Vegas, Nevada, or Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or somewhere crazy like that. And he goes to this distant country and he squanders everything he had. He just blows it on what Luke calls wild living, which we can imagine what that would have included. And he eventually hits rock bottom. He finds himself down in the mud, like literally he's down in the pigsty, and he realizes how stupid he's been and how foolish he's been. And so he comes up with a plan. And his plan is, first off, I realize I've been an idiot. And so I'm going to go home and I'm going to just confess it all to my dad, and I'm going to face the music in this way. And the second part of his plan is that he's going to ask his dad to kind of make him like a hired servant. And he comes with a little speech that he's going to throw out. Verse 18, he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And what he's thinking is, hey, I know I can't be a son anymore. I've just blown everything. But maybe I can make some sort of restitution over the long haul and repay at least a portion of what I blew. And so he heads back home after being away for several years and wasting everything he had. And he finally tops the hill to their home. And the father sees him. And the father incredibly runs to his son, which was unheard of in that day. And he runs to his son, and he shows absolute emotional abandon. And he embraces his son, and he just kisses him over and over and over again. And he won't let him go. And the son tries to roll out this little restitution plan, but the father won't hear of it. Not at all. The dad says, get the best robe. You know, get a ring and put it on his finger. Get shoes for his feet. And all these are very symbolic acts. He's saying, I'm restoring you, son. You're not going to try to earn your way back. I'm going to bring you back. You are still my son. And then he says, kill the fatted calf. We're going to throw a party for the whole village to come to, and we're going to announce to the whole world to let them know that this son of mine, he's home. He was lost, now he's found. He was good as dead, but now he's alive again. It's incredible. And a lot of people think that Jesus' story ends there, but it doesn't. That's only the first half of it. And there's a whole nother section to it, and it involves the other son, the older brother, who we're going to focus on today. And let's read through this portion of Jesus' story, and then we'll talk through it. But here's what Jesus says as he continues his story. Verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. Your brother's come home, he replied, and your father's killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never even given me a goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. My son, the father said, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead, and he's now alive again. He was lost and has now been found. You know, one of the genius of the marks of the genius of Jesus' teaching is that we find ourselves identifying with the characters in them. Like you can learn a lot about yourself by figuring out which one of the characters you identify with. Like an old story. I don't know if it ever happened or not, but a Sunday school teacher is teaching on this prodigal story here, and to their class, they say to the class, but there is one class for whom the return of the prodigal son brings no joy and celebration. There's one who experiences only disappointment and bitterness and resentment. Who was it? And one of the kids raises their hand and says, the fatted calf. Yeah. I don't know if it ever happened, but I sure hope it did. But it's an interesting thing when you decide to come home, like when you decide to stop being the younger son, one of two things will happen to you. Either you will become like the father, or you will become like the older brother. The older brother is furious about what is going on here. See, the older brother, he's been working in the fields, and when he approaches the house, there's a party going on, and if all were well in the heart of this son, this older son, he would immediately enter into the party and enter into the joy, whatever the source of the joy was. But he's suspicious from the very beginning. And so he asks somebody outside. He's like, hey, what's going on? And they tell him, they say, hey, your brother's come back and your father's killed the fatted calf. And did you notice what a big deal this whole fatted calf thing is? Like the servant says, you know, your younger brother's back, your father gave him the calf, and the older brother comes to the father and says, you gave him the calf. How could you give him the calf? I can't believe you gave him the calf. You gave him the calf. You never so much gave me a goat. And now you gave him the calf. Why'd you give him the calf? How could you give him the calf? You gave him the calf. And we're sitting there reading this saying, I know this means something, but I'm not exactly sure what. Like, what is this all about? Well, people in that time and place almost never had meat for a meal. It was a delicacy. And if you ever had meat, it was a party. But the greatest delicacy and the most expensive possible thing to do was to slay a fatted calf. Like the whole village would have been there. This is something a family would have never done for a private party, ever. It was so expensive. And therefore, the older brother is saying, how dare you use our wealth like this? I should have had some say in this. I have obeyed you. How dare you do this? And then he insults the father. Because if you look there in verse 29, he doesn't say, Father. He says, look, which is a direct affront and deliberate insult to his father. He doesn't give any address to the father whatsoever. He basically says, look, old man. It's an incredible insult. And then he publicly humiliates his father by not going into the greatest feast his father has ever thrown. He makes his father come out to him. But what does the father do? How does the father respond? Well, Jesus' listeners, they would expect the father to be furious. And he had every right to be furious. Like he could simply order his son to go into the house. He didn't have to reason with his son at all. And parents understand about this, right? Like when I was a kid and I would try to get out of doing something my parents wanted me to do, I would often say to them, why? Like, why do I have to do what you're telling me to do? And they might reason with me for a little while, but eventually, when they got tired of my questions or couldn't think of any other reasons why, they would fall back on a naked appeal to power and authority, and they would use the same phrase that all parents have used from the very beginning of time. Why should I do that? I would say. And they would say, that's right, because I said so. I hated that when I was a kid. I swore I would never use that phrase. But lo and behold, I got 3 kids of my own, and I got to tell you, that's one of my favorite phrases. Because I said so. The father could just order his son, get in the house because I said so. And the son probably would have gone. Like the son understands all about orders and obedience. But notice the father doesn't want another hired servant. See, God does not want just external obedience. He wants a right heart. And that cannot be forced. And that cannot be given grudgingly. There is a door to your heart, and you hold the key. And God Almighty will not force himself through that door. So the father goes out in humble love. Even though he could come out in judgment, he goes out in humble love. Just as he went out to the first son in humble love. Jesus is kind of comparing them here. Just as he goes out to the first son in humble love, when we expect judgment and anger, he goes out to the second son in humble love. And he pleads. He actually responds with a very, very tender word. He says, my son. It could actually be translated, my child. My child, the father says to the child who wouldn't call him father. My child. Every other father I know would have disowned you for what you'd already done. But he says, I still want you at the feast. I still want you to come to the house and come to the celebration. And as we're on the edge of our seats asking the question, like, how's it going to end? Like, will the family come together in unity and love? How's the older brother going to respond? Well, Jesus ends the parable, sort of a cliffhanger. And we got to find ourselves in this story. And I wonder, where do you find yourself in this great story? See, a lot of us, we are more like the older brother than we are the younger brother. Or we were the younger brother, and now we've become an older brother. And you might be thinking, like, what are you talking about here, Dave? Well, in a way, we think that God owes us. That's the sin of the older brother. Like, both brothers were lost in this story. And you say, well, how was the older brother lost, Dave? Like, I mean, he stayed home, he obeyed, he worked. Well, that's how. See, the brilliance of Jesus here is with the younger brother, Jesus gives us a picture of sin that's very, very traditional. Like, anybody can look at the younger brother's sin and say, yep, insulting his father, wild living, pleasure, pigsty, down in the gutter, self-indulgent. That's sin, like we'd all agree. But then with the older brother, he turns the table. And we don't often think of it this way, but when you get to the end of it all, here's what we're left with. There are two sons. One is very, very good, and one is very, very bad. And they're both alienated from the Father's heart. Each one of them wanted the Father's things, but not the Father. Each one of them, check this out, each one of them used the Father to get what they really wanted. They didn't love the Father. They just used the Father to get the status, the wealth, the estate, the things they really, really loved. But one of them did it by being very, very good, and one of them did it by being very, very bad. But they're both lost. The bad one's lost in his badness. The good one's lost in his goodness. And in the end, it's the bad son that's saved. And the good son, as far as we know, where Jesus left the story, he's lost. It's not his sin that's keeping him from the Father. It's his goodness. It's his righteousness. He's proud of it all. He's proud of his goodness. He says, I've never disobeyed you. And he thinks the Father owes him. And so he's angry for what's going on. And he's bitter. And for a lot of us, well, that describes our relationship with God. A lot of us, we find ourselves bitter and angry. And it's the way that we try to control God. You see, all our morality, all our obedience is a way of getting God to give us what we really, really want. And it's not God himself. You believe you're owed. God owes you because you've been so great and so good. You've towed the line. And so you have a transactional relationship with God. This parable, the more I read it and study it, the more I believe it's told to and written for older, lost brothers. Like the setting for this story and the whole of the 15th chapter of Luke, it actually involves a level of tension and drama that's something to behold, and the fearlessness and sheer gutsiness of Jesus as a teacher is really on full display here, because here's the setting for Luke 15. If we go all the way back to the first couple of verses of Luke 15, here's what we read. Verse 1 says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around him. And then verse 2 says, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were grumbling, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. See, there are three categories of people in the first two verses of Luke 15. All right, first of all, there's Jesus, who is this holy man, this prophet, a devout teacher, a rabbi. And then secondly, there are all these sinners, like these tax collectors and spiritual zeros, and they're flocking to Jesus, and they're thoroughly disreputable people. And then there's a third category here that verses 1 and 2 let us in on, and those are the people who are thought of as spiritual giants, like, Pharisees and scribes and teachers of the law, who are devoted to following after God. And they couldn't understand Jesus. They couldn't wrap their minds around Jesus. They say, this is a guy who claims to be a holy man and a teacher, and he welcomes sinners, and he eats with them. And so they're offended by Jesus accepting and relating to all these sinners. And what they're saying essentially is, hey, he's watering down the faith. Like, sure, it's no wonder he's successful and can draw lots of crowds, because he just, trashes all of our traditions, and he's no different than they are. No wonder he's got so many people coming to him. And they criticize Jesus, and they hope that maybe he'll be embarrassed by it all. Maybe he'll be apologetic. Maybe he'll change. That's the setting. So in Luke 15, Jesus tells three stories. Each of them involves something lost. Someone loses a sheep in the first one. Somebody loses a coin in the second one. Somebody loses a son in the third. And someone searches and someone finds. And they all knew the meaning that Jesus is laying out here in these three stories. The sinners who are with Jesus, these spiritual zeros, they hear these stories and they say, well, man, that's me. No doubt. That's me. That's my story for sure. I was the lost sheep. I was the lost coin. I was the younger son in a distant country, and I've been found. And the one that has found me is Jesus. Jesus in these stories, before both sinners and these hostile religious leaders, is clearly claiming to be the one that is searching on behalf of God. Jesus is saying in these stories to these religious grumblers, he's saying, not only do I not apologize for accepting this people, but I tell you, this is the work of God that you're seeing. This is why I came. And this parable, again, I really believe, the more I read it, it's really to older brothers. Like, why do you think it ends the way that it does? Jesus is speaking to Pharisees, and he's basically inviting these older brothers to listen to this appeal and put themselves in this situation and respond. It's like participatory theater. And it's for us too. And some of us in this room, we are older brother types, and we've got older brother type of hearts. And so you're mad. You're mad at, people who have hurt you, and you're mad because your life isn't going like you imagined and hope it would. And you're thinking to yourself, I've been the good one. I've towed the line. And the main thing between you and God is your goodness. And you're mad at things, and you're mad at people, and you're mad at God because you've tried hard and you've worked hard, and you're so frustrated, and you're alienated from the Father's heart, and you're lost. See, this parable forces us to sort through what the gospel of Jesus Christ really is all about. What is the Christian message, after all? It's not do what you want, like the younger son, because God's got to forgive you anyway. And it's not be a good person like the older son, because then God's going to have to give you what you want. He's going to have to accept you and do whatever you want. And we miss this, especially in our world today. Like, there are two ways to try and control God and control people and really control your own life. And one is by going off and living any old way that you want. And the other is by living a very, very moral, religious life. But both can just try to control God. Sometimes we think, older brother types think, if I love people, if I'm good, if I go to church, if I pray, then God has to bless me. God has to bless my life. And you're just trying to control God in that way. If we're an older brother type, our morality, all our obedience, it's just a way of getting God to give us what we really want, which is not God. You believe you're owed. God owes you because you've been so good. We need to take heed from the old James Proctor hymn that says, lay your deadly goodness down at Jesus' feet. Live in him and him alone, gloriously complete. To come to a place where we obey God just to get God, to love him and know him and relate to him and resemble him, then we're getting somewhere. Older brother lostness and younger brother lostness, you're both lost either way. So CCC, what do we do with this? What do we do with this incredible story that confronts us? Well, we've got to become the right kinds of sons and daughters, not alienated from the Father's heart, one way or the other. How do we get there? I'll give you one thing to think about. If we're going to become the right kinds of sons and daughters, we got to be moved by what it costs to bring us home. We just have to be undone by it. We have to see what it cost God to bring us home, because it did cost. And at the very end, Jesus kind of gives us a hint at the last verse when the father says to the older son, everything I have is yours. And that's literally true. Like, because the younger brother had liquidated and spent his inheritance, and now every single thing that the father had belonged to the older brother. Every robe, every ring, every sandal, every fatted calf belonged to the older brother. See, the younger brother could only be brought back into the family at enormous cost and expense to the older brother. It's not free. It's not simple to be saved. Somebody has to pay. The older brother has to pay, and he's furious about it. Now, why does Jesus put such a nasty older brother in the story? Well, maybe he's trying to create a longing in us for a true older brother. Like, what would a true older brother have done? I mean, a true older brother would have seen the agony of the father, and he would have said, Father, I'm going out, and I'm going to look for my younger brother, and if my younger brother's made a mess of himself and squandered all his inheritance, I'll bring him home, Dad. I'll bring him home, even at my own expense. That would be a true older brother. But this poor kid, this younger brother, he doesn't have a true older brother. But we do, don't we? We have a true older brother. See, Jesus Christ gives us a bad older brother, so we'll long for the right one. We don't need someone to go out from the next town, to find us. We need someone to go from heaven to earth to find us. We don't need an older brother who brings us into God's family just at the cost of his wallet, but at the cost of his life. Because on the cross, Jesus Christ was stripped naked so that we could be clothed in the robe of honor that we don't deserve. And on the cross, Jesus called, my God, my God. The only time he didn't refer to God as Father, because at that moment, he was not being treated as a son so that you and I could be treated as sons and daughters. See, he paid the debt that deep down we all know that we owe. And because everything he had, like Jesus had everything the Father had, everything he had, he shares it with us and brings us home at enormous expense to himself. And when we see that, to the degree that we see that, well, that could change our whole approach to relating to God. Where do you find yourself in this story here, CCC? And how's it going to end for you? Are you going to be, like the younger son, understanding you need to turn and return home to the Father? Are you going to be like the older son, bitter, angry, staying outside the celebration? How's it going to end? You get to decide. And this is why we never need to get too far away from communion, what we celebrate every single week. We got to be reminded again of what it cost God to bring us home at great expense to Jesus Christ, his body and his blood given up for us on the cross. We take a little piece of bread, a little bit of juice. It reminds us of what it cost to bring us home. And we're going to celebrate that right now. We're going to remember on this Mother's Day what Jesus did for us to bring us back into God's family, to accept us, to restore us, to renew us. If you didn't get one of those individually wrapped packets, just grab them right now. And let's take a few moments and let's focus on what it costs to bring us home.